Hey yo, what up? It's your boy. Oppenheimer, the brand new Christopher Nolan feature-length film, has really made a cultural splash ever since it came out a couple of weeks ago as of me recording this video. I'm a massive Christopher Nolan fan. I've pretty much seen most, if not all, of his movies. I'm missing a couple. I'll definitely get to them eventually. But obviously, Oppenheimer is one that I am personally really looking forward to, especially already from the things that I have heard from friends who have already seen it. But there is just one small issue when it comes to myself and many of my peers living in Japan who want to go watch Oppenheimer. And it's that even though it's been a couple of weeks now since Oppenheimer came out, it hasn't come out in Japan yet. And that's because there is this big contention as to whether Oppenheimer or a film like Oppenheimer should even be released to a Japanese audience or not. Now, for those of you who are completely out of the loop, Oppenheimer follows the story, the titular character, who basically is the real-life person who created or is responsible for creating the atomic bomb. I don't think I have to explain to you why that is already a very contentious and sensitive topic for a lot of Japanese people, considering that in history we are the only country ever to be a victim to a direct atomic bomb attack. But there is this really interesting discussion that is happening online right now about whether it is right or wrong to not allow Oppenheimer to be filmed or, I guess, aired in Japanese cinemas or not. So we're going to be looking at this Japan Today article that says Oppenheimer isn't opening in Japan this week as of, July 21st, because it came out July 21st, but the country has a long history of cinema about the war. So this article that I found on Japan Today, shout out to them, pretty much does this very comprehensive breakdown as to perhaps why it is almost hypocritical for the Japanese film industry, or I guess people responsible for what gets aired in Japan and what doesn't get aired in Japan, to not allow a film like Oppenheimer to be aired in Japan because of its sensitive topics, when Japan itself has had a massive history of covering movies about World War II and about the atomic bomb droppings. It says here in this article, a delay in naming a release date is nothing new for Japan, where Hollywood releases often take place weeks or months later than other national markets. I mean, we're obviously just used to that at this point. Japan's cinema industry is savvy enough to take a wait-and-see approach to blockbuster films. If Oppenheimer fails at the box office in other markets, then Japan may decide on a quick opening in a smaller number of cinemas. If it is the global hit the producers hope, it may open across the country. And as of, obviously this was written before Oppenheimer actually came out, now we have some pretty good numbers for Oppenheimer, and suffice it to say, it kind of was a global hit. A lot of people, at least from what I have been seeing, have given their praises to the film, which only makes me want to go watch it even more. Some have speculated the tragic history of events in Hiroshima and Nagasaki make the film too sensitive for Japanese audiences, but concerns that the film contains sensitivities to Japan's past can be easily discarded by a quick glance through Japan's cinematic history. Obviously, I'm not going to go through this entire article. If you'd like to check it out for yourself, then I've left the link down in the description below, but I'm just going to be highlighting just some key points in this article that I can give my 2 cents on, because obviously I am not fully adversed in the whole filming cinematic history of Japan concerning war films. But this one is a big pointer. By the late 1930s, studios and filmmakers were drafted into the war effort making propaganda films. Until the end of the Second World War, the Japanese government had been strictly censoring all films in line with efforts to produce this state-sanctioned propaganda. From 1945 to 1949, the US occupation forces set up procedures to ensure films avoided intentionally nationalist or militaristic themes. And this is not really like a shocker to anyone, really. I mean, I think every country during this period were putting their efforts into making propaganda films because it was a world war. We wanted to win, as every country did, and we needed to convince the people in those countries to say that we're the best, we number one. So that's not really a big revelation. However, Japan's film classification body was created in 1949 following the withdrawal of the production code. This gave Japanese authorities the chance to determine their own rules around film content based on themes of languages, sex, nudity, violence, and cruelty, horror and menace, drug use, and criminal behavior. And that's a big reason as to why, say, a lot of underground films in Japan, especially post-World War II, ended up being some of the most unique and interesting to film critics critics and film watchers, but also different in terms of the standards of what is considered okay for film. Japanese film was always quite progressive in terms of artistic license, escaping the type of strictly enforced limitations found in America's Hays Code, which put restrictions on content including nudity, profanity, and depictions of crime. And you only have to take a look at, say, for example, Takashi Miike's filmography or any of the B-grade horror films that came out post-war to immediately understand just how much Japan's film industry did not give a fuck about these codes. Filmmakers in Japan had freedom to practice their art, so the pinku, or soft kith, films of the 1960s and 70s were products of the major studios rather than underground independence. Since the 1950s, censorship in the form of suggested edits or very rarely disallowed films has mostly been in response to violent or overly explicit sexual imagery rather than concerns over political or militaristic issues. And it's weird because Japan has this very weird, I guess, standard when it comes to like, okay, this one is like extremely gory or extremely violent or extremely just disturbing. Yeah, that's all right. That won't put any trauma in people though. But any political stuff though? No, we do not do that in this country. Which, again, is very weird, right? Because you don't have to be, a critic of Japanese film to take one look at the Japanese film industry or the Japanese film history to see that, yeah, there's a lot of, like, really messed up films that were made, especially back then. Like, there were a lot of films, especially again in the J-horror genre. Say, for example, like this article points out films like Battle Royale and Ichi the Killer created a new level of violence combining the horror genre with comic moments. Meanwhile, samurai and yakuza films continue to find audiences, as do high school themed dramas. And, for the most part, it is very wholesome. Anybody can kind of watch it and enjoy it. But it's also interesting how when it comes to any political issues, they get really touchy about it, and it's very weird if you ask me. And yet, even though from a glance Japan is very touchy when it comes to anything that has to do with war or any political films and stuff like that, Japan has a very rich history in making films that explore World War II. For example, as early as 1952, Kaneto Shindo's Children of Hiroshima directly addressed the aftermath of the war through confronting imagery, then with a gentle humanist touch. A year later, Hideo Sekigawa's Hiroshima upped the political ante with a docudrama critical of the United States' actions in a film that included real survivors from a nuclear blast acting as victims. The title of Shohei Imamura's Black Rain, not to be confused with the Ridley Scott Yakuza film, referenced the color of the acid rain following the nuclear blast in Hiroshima and was recognized with some of Japan's highest film honors. And anime as well, the weebs aren't safe either. Anime has also directly shown the damage wrought by Oppenheimer's device, most notably in Barefoot Gen in 1983 and its sequel in 1986. And the list goes on. There are a ton of films, some as early or as recent as warmly welcoming Clint Eastwood's 2006 twin release of Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers, which showed the battle from the views of Japanese and US soldiers respectively. Both films, by the way, fucking amazing. I would highly recommend it. Stories of bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are not a taboo topic in Japan. Of all the nations in the world to be banning films, Japan must surely be near the bottom of the list. And I think that is the big highlighted idea for this discussion, is that Japan is not banning, or I guess is not thinking about banning Oppenheimer from being released in Japanese cinemas because of the topics that are talked about. Obviously, Oppenheimer actions led directly to the incidents of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but that is not the reason why the Japanese industry is deciding to, I guess, ban the airing of Oppenheimer, because then that would be incredibly hypocritical to their entire film history up until this point. So, you might be asking then, what is the real reason as to why they're delaying or even considering not airing Oppenheimer? There is only speculations at this point. Who knows? By the time you're watching this video, this might all be completely false and Oppenheimer was successfully released to all Japanese cinemas. But as of me recording this right now, there is no even announcement as to when the release date of Oppenheimer in Japanese cinemas is going to be. One of the biggest theories is because the American release, or the original release for Oppenheimer, which is July 21st, if I remember correctly, is very close, or people are saying is very close to the 2 days of which the real atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That being the first and second week of August, respectively. Which, look, I get it. You know, it's an important Memorial Day, especially for the survivors and families of the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And, you know, releasing a movie very close to those very important days for these people might seem a little bit insensitive. Like, that's kind of the equivalent of, you know, getting murdered by a very famous serial killer, and then on the day that your family members got murdered by the serial killer, they release a movie about that serial killer. Not a great feeling. The second reason as to why they may not potentially be airing Oppenheimer in Japan is because of the themes that are explored, or I guess the standards of what the Japanese side wants to see in a story like Oppenheimer. And it's that there are a lot of ideas that are being thrown around that the only war films, especially World War II films, that get to be released and are highly praised amongst Japanese audiences are the ones that make Japan look like the victim. In other words, if there are any films about World War II that make Japan look like the bad guys, then Japan is not very receptive to those films, which, look, understandable, all right? You know, history is written by the winners, and nobody wants to see or be reminded of a losing war. I completely understand that. But again, this kind of goes against the entire history of the Japanese film industry concerning World War II films. I mean, not all of these films that I discussed in this article that were made in Japan or produced by Japanese film industry necessarily make Japan look like the innocent guys. Like, yes, it does very much look at the entire story of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings from the perspective of Japan. A lot of the times it kind of depicts the lives and the stories of those after the bomb was dropped and the aftermath of how the people of Japan got over this massive catastrophe. And look, I personally have not seen Oppenheimer yet. I don't know anything about it. I just assume it's going to cover, you know, the story of Oppenheimer, the person, and kind of maybe tack on the actual results of his misdoings at maybe near the end of the film. I don't know. These are all just speculations. I have not seen the film yet. But perhaps the Japanese film industry looked at Oppenheimer and went, yeah, so the way that you showed the bombing, the way that you showed the Japanese side of things, doesn't really make us look or feel good about it. Which, look, I'm sorry if this comes off as a little insensitive, but why? Like, what's the point of that? I think regardless of what side of the story you are telling when it comes to this very sensitive topic for a lot of people, I think it is important to show, especially if it is factually accurate, which from the sounds of it, the Oppenheimer movie is pretty factually accurate. It does actually follow through with what happened to Oppenheimer and the things that surrounded him. So if the whole reason as to why they are not deciding to air Oppenheimer is a result of these two theories, then I think it's a little just dumb, because I think a lot of Japanese people are also unaware of the atrocities that Japan committed in the World War, a lot of which were a lot more horrible than what the US ever did in some regards. Look, at the end of the day, what was the quote? War isn't about who is right, it's about who is left. And I think that is a really potent saying, especially in this topic when it comes to films revolving around warfare. I think regardless of what perspective it's told from, if the film does a good enough job to show the power and the atrocities and the destruction that war brings, regardless of which side it's told from, then I think it's done its job, and I'm hoping that Oppenheimer is one of those examples. As did all these other Japanese-produced World War II films did, by really showing like just how bad war is, how bad nuclear weaponry is, how bad fighting amongst the human race is in general, which I don't think you need an explanation as to why that is bad. I personally just think, you know, it's Japan kind of being a little bit hypocritical. And it's funny because there's actually a large majority of just regular Japanese cinema goers who really want to see this goddamn film. Like, yes, it does cover a perhaps very sensitive topic in Japan, but it's a sensitive topic everywhere. Honestly, like, there isn't a single person on planet Earth living right now, regardless of which country you are from, regardless of if your country was even involved in the World War or not, who will completely understand and empathize with the fact that, yes, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings were a very sensitive topic, and it's not something that you should go about spewing, you know, lightheartedly. I mean, we saw a great example of that when that Kick streamer was, you know, threatening to drop another bomb in Japan for entertainment for his Kick audience. If you haven't watched that video, links in the description or the card up there. But, you know, either way, I think Japan should just kind of allow this movie to be aired. I think they're kind of really doing an L take with their reasonings behind it. And hell, you know, again, these are all just speculations. You never know. The real reason why it's been delayed so much is maybe because they're having a hard time subtitling it or even dubbing it. Who knows? Like, Japan is very good at that, as we mentioned at the beginning of this article right here. You know, it can be months or even like a whole year before Japan finally gets the version that the Hollywood had, you know, a year prior. So maybe it's just that. But I do feel it's a little bit sus that we haven't even got an announcement for the release yet. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. Look, worst case scenario, it doesn't get aired in Japan and Japanese people are just going to go out and pirate the film. So that's on them. But anyways, guys, let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Do you think Japan should allow the airing of Oppenheimer? Do you think they shouldn't allow the airing of Oppenheimer? I'd love to know your opinions, so please let me know. And hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to smack my face right here. Subscribe to the channel. Let's keep making big channel number go bigger over here next to my head. A couple more videos you can check out if you enjoyed this one, and the links to my social media as well as my Patreon to support me directly, and all of my other channels and everything like that down in the description below. And I will see you all in the next one. Peace.